Dr. Banchek works with children and adults in private practice in Stamford, Connecticut. And Mark, before we move on to Dr. Clafter, please tell us a little bit about the Katona Study Group, and I'll put the information about how to get on your list to be notified of events as well. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Mark Banchek.
Thank you, Janet. I want to thank Janet and Sylvia and Lisa, of course, Tara Framer, who helped put this together. We started the Katona Study Group 25 years ago with Cindy Bloom. I'm a child and adult psychiatrist, and Cindy is an Ericksonian hypnotherapist. And we just believed 25 years ago that medicine was somewhat broken and that we needed to do a better job in learning to be healers. And so we brought together the alternative and the normative medical community to have discussions every month. This is the third year that we've had Dr. Clafter present to us, and we decided this year to join forces with the Westchester Center for Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis. So we're just thrilled. Dr. Clafter, by the way, is licensed in the state of New York. And so although he's very busy, you should know that he is available for consultations and for supervision. Now I'll introduce Dr. Clafter. It's really my honor. I've known Dr. Clafter for many years. I consider him a very esteemed colleague, a person of tremendous integrity, and I don't want to embarrass him, but true brilliance, in my opinion, and a friend. Dr. Clafter is an adult and adolescent psychiatrist and psychoanalyst and therapist. He is the director of the Advanced Psychodynamic Psychotherapy Training Program at the Cincinnati Psychoanalytic Institute, and also serves as the track leader for the technique curriculum in their analytic training program. Dr. Clafter has served as a psychotherapy supervisor and lecturer at the University of Cincinnati Psychiatric Residency Training Program, where he is the 6-time winner of the Golden Apple Teaching Award. Dr. Clafter, and I just heard about this, is also the 2024 winner of the American Psychoanalytic Association's Esther Sapshin Teaching Award for his innovative techniques in teaching about psychoanalytic theory and technique. Dr. Clafter has led trainings and seminars in the US and overseas. He's published on various topics related to psychoanalytic theory and technique, as well as the interface between psychoanalysis and religion. In his private life, Dr. Clafter is an accomplished photographer, musician, the father of 4 girls, proud father-in-law of a wonderful son-in-law, and recently became a grandfather. Without further ado, Dr. Nahum Andrew Clafter.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Janet. I'd like to thank the Westchester Center and also Katona. Let me just get to, I like to usually tell people who I am and what I do, but Mark did that pretty well. So I think I can skip ahead to the overview of the presentation. So this is what I'd like to take us through. And again, I invite people to interject as things occur to them. Usually things that occur to you are occurring to other people also. And I can answer right in real time, sometimes better than waiting till the end. I'll take responsibility to move us along, and I'll count on Janet and Mark to moderate, to interject at a timely moment. So I'd like to present, to start with, an integrative model of development, psychological problems, and how psychotherapy works. That involves a bit of theory about the mind, about development, and about how therapy works. I promise it won't be boring. This will be hopefully an interesting way of talking about theory. I think when theory is done well, it should be actually really interesting and enlivening, and not something dry or highly intellectualized. I aimed for this to be suitable for both experts and beginners. For beginners, because I won't be using a lot of jargon and I'll try to talk in everyday language, and for experts, because I hope that I'll be talking about this in a new way that you haven't thought of before. Then I want to talk about the impact of patients on their therapists in terms of how adult personality continues to develop. And that's why I want to introduce with a little bit of theory, because that will tie together what my topic really is how our patients and our work impact us in our development as adults. And then in doing so, I'll talk about how our work impacts our values and our beliefs, what therapists are like in relationships. I'd like to share some observations about quirks and challenges that therapists suffer from as a part of that. Then I hope there will be a good amount of time for questions and answers, and not just questions and answers, but also your thoughts and comments and discussion. I'm sure a lot of you, well, I know a lot of you are therapists, and I think most of you, even if you're not therapists, have been patients. And I'll count on Mark and Janet to moderate that. And I hope that will leave us at least a half hour for questions and answers and thoughts and comments. So I'm going to start with, this is a model. I actually developed this model in teaching residents at the University of Cincinnati and students at the Cincinnati Psychoanalytic Institute. And a lot of my students asked for copies of this, and they shared this with their patients. And so actually this is something that patients usually find very helpful also, maybe even more than my students. So I'm going to talk about a view of how human development works, both in kind of healthy aspects of development and unhealthy aspects of development. We'll start with like an ideal home, like the best possible parents you can imagine. We'll call this developmental scenario A, or maybe like the Banchik home. This is like if you're privileged to be born into the Banchik family, this is what growing up is like. Can people see this cursor that I'm moving here? People see that on the screen?
Yep.
Okay. So
I still can't see anything. I've tried everything.
okay, so I think there's something about your settings.
Maybe I can respond to you privately. I think you're one of only a few people experiencing that problem, and I don't want to stop the presentation. Just message me privately.
So this is a model of how human development works that is based on the idea that our personalities are formed by how we experience ourselves with other people in relationships. And those relationships become integrated into us and sort of organize how we experience ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we experience and think about other people, and how we imagine interacting. And then it shapes how we actually interact and engage with other people. So in this model, this is a person. Hopefully my artwork is at least that recognizable, that this is a person. And inside this person, there's a view of this person's self and other people and interactions between them. So we'll say by the time this person is about 5 years old, this person develops sort of a first laid down, consolidated view of, we'll say, himself and other people. And again, he's privileged to grow up in the Banchik home. So by the time he's 5 years old, he sees these people that he interacts with, and he says, you know, they like listening to what I have to say. That's how they act when I say something. And I think that must mean I'm interesting and I have good ideas. That's why they like what I have to say. So let's skip ahead now about 20 years later when this person is 25. So if this is Mark's son, who's 25 now, and he's in class, and he meets a young woman in class. This model, which I'll talk about who innovated this model later, his name is Lester Laborsky. This model is called the CCRT model, which stands for Core Conflictual Relationship Theme. This model says the following: every interaction that we have with another person can be thought of in 3 little stages. And these are the 3 stages. It starts with, and I'm going to spell this out exactly with an example. It starts with a wish or a need. In other words, like this person has a wish or a need as far as what he would like to do with or needs from this other person. Then he imagines, if he would act out his wish or his need, he imagines how that person would respond back. Now, this is all happening inside this person's mind. And then the 3rd stage is the actual behavior. And Dr. Laborsky and his research team demonstrated very elegantly that the actual behavior is a response to what this person imagined the other person would respond. Now I'll spell it out with practical examples so you'll understand exactly what it means. So this person, we're going to call him Mark's son, is in a class, and there's another person who speaks up in class, and she has a comment that's just like so brilliant, so insightful, so well stated. And he says like, gosh, like, how did she come up with that idea? I would love to get to know her. She's so interesting. So his wish is, I'd like to get to know her. That's his wish. So he imagines he's going to say, you know, it was so interesting what you said in class. I don't know where you got that idea. I don't know if that was your own idea or you read it somewhere. Do you have any time coming up? Would you like to meet for coffee sometime, like after class or before class? I would just love to hear more about how you came up with this. I've never heard a thought like that before. So what does he imagine her response would be to saying that? So I think he imagines like, look, I'm a nice, interesting guy. So if I'm impressed with her thoughts and I want to hear more, like, she'll be flattered if I would say that to her. Like, that would be a nice experience for her. I don't know if she's free. I don't know if she, you know, has some reason that she doesn't want to meet for coffee with a man. I don't know, you know, I don't know what she'll say, but I think she'll be flattered. I think it'll be a nice thing to say to her either way. And she'll, all things being equal, why wouldn't she meet me for coffee? So his actual behavior is, I'll introduce myself. Okay. So now we'll skip to like, we'll move ahead to the person who was not so fortunate to be born into Mark's home. Let's say this person was born into the Clafter home, or we'll call it developmental scenario B. And this person has parents that are maybe acting differently than the Banchiks were. Or this is a very temperamentally sensitive person who feels, you know, really easily anxious, really easily slighted. And by the time he's 5 years old, he has a different idea. He feels like, you know, they're really too busy to talk to me. And I'm annoying them when I try to talk to them. Like, that's how he feels by the time he's about 5 years old. Now, this is oversimplified. And by the way, I don't know really what happened in the first 5 years of life. I don't know how much these two parents were really overwhelmed and busy or depressed or anxious, or whether this is just a very temperamentally challenging child that feels this way anyway. We don't know, but I'm sure that these parents would be appalled if they would know that this is how this child feels, and they would be very surprised, and they would say none of our other children feel this way. We don't really know. We just know that by about 5, this child starts to feel this way. So if we skip ahead 20 years with this child, 25, it's the same class. This kid is sitting next to Mark's son. Okay, this is a different kid sitting next to Mark's son. And it's the same thing. Same interesting woman speaks up in class. She makes this brilliant comment, and he says, gosh, to himself, gosh, I'd like to get to know her. But how does he imagine she will respond? So we don't have your sound on, but I think you're saying probably like, he's going to imagine like, she's too busy for me and I'll annoy her. That's how he imagines that she'll respond. So what does he do in response? He says like, I'll leave her alone. I'll leave her alone. I'm not going to introduce myself. I'm not going to say that comment. And then, of course, he sees Mark's son go by and say the comment he was going to say. And she says, gosh, that's so nice. Yes, I'd love to meet for coffee. I'm free for 45 minutes. I could get coffee now. I have class in 45 minutes. So this is maybe a model of social anxiety disorder, avoidant personality, something in that domain. And we have all, who are therapists, met patients like this. Some of us have felt like this. Probably most of us have felt like this at one time or another. Some of us feel like this all the time. Some of us used to feel like this all the time, and we got help for this in therapy. But certainly as therapists, we see people like this come through our doors and ask for help. So there's different ways that therapists help. There are therapists that intervene right here. This idea, I'll leave her alone. So a behavioral therapist says like, you know, we can't let him never try to meet somebody. I mean, it's going to be uncomfortable, but if he doesn't ever introduce himself to anybody for the rest of his life, the only thing he'll accomplish is he will succeed in never getting rejected. That's true, but he's never going to make a friend. He's never going to have a girlfriend. He's never going to have a colleague. He's never going to get hired. It's going to be a really limited life. And we don't want, so this is where, so a behavioral therapist is someone who feels like, this is where I'm going to intervene. I'm going to demand that he find a way to join a discussion group. He's got to join the Katona group. Maybe not the Westchester Center, but the Katona group. And I'm going to make him go early to meetings, and he's going to introduce himself. I'm going to use sort of like little digestible increases in behavior that that this person can handle. A behavioral therapist feels like this is the best way to help him. Then there are people that intervene here. They say like, well, this is like the first place that this system kind of goes haywire. Like this idea that he'd like to meet her. Yeah, that's a very good idea. I'm glad that you'd like to meet her, but she's too busy for me. I'll annoy her. I mean, how does anyone meet anyone? I mean, is she only annoyed by you before she met you? And this person will start to challenge these thoughts right here. This is what a cognitive therapist feels like. This is just like the most immediate place. It's the easiest place for us to intervene. And this is where the system goes haywire. I think I can mitigate the most damage by intervening right here. Then there are therapists who say, well, I get what you're saying, but this person is swimming all day long in this feeling like everyone's too busy for me and I'm annoying. So whether you meet someone or not, it's like you're having dreams about being annoying, you're imagining being annoying, you're probably annoyed at yourself for being annoying. And this is where the person is really suffering. This is really like the insides and the inner experience of this person. And I want to intervene inside. And therapists that intervene here are psychoanalytic or psychodynamic psychotherapists. Now, all these therapies work. And I've shared these slides with people from different disciplines within therapy for many years, and I've never had anyone really substantially disagree with this model. And what I want to talk about tonight is what the impact is on us of working with people that have problems like this and helping them over the years. What is it like for us? We spend lots of time theorizing about how patients change in therapy. But I want to talk about how we change in therapy. Now, I have a little more theory for you. It's another person's theory. This was Lester Laborsky's theory. This fits inside a larger thing called object relations theories. We'll get back to that later and what that means. I apologize for the bad terminology of theories. They're weird words that are hard to understand. I want to talk about a view of the self. This is from, this is the model that was introduced by Heinz Kohut. This is a model of how we experience ourselves. This model says that the way the self develops, and the self is your experience of who you are as a person, that over time, the way you experience who you are as a person can be divided into sort of two poles or aspects. One pole is called the grandiose self. Another pole is called the idealized parent imago. Again, I'm sorry about the terminology, but I'll explain what this all means. I'm just mentioning the terms in case you come across it. This is the part of us as a very, very young child that needs lots of attention and admiration and like needs to be a prima donna. This is a normal experience of a young person. Young people need to feel admired, fawned over, noticed, get lots of attention. This is a part that wants to be the center of the tension. This is a very exhibitionistic part of who we are. This is the part that says, look at me, look at me. I'm so wonderful. Couldn't you just eat me up? This is the part of us that like really needs those kinds of experiences from others in our lives. Now, in maturity, okay, so the exhibitionism of a young child is cute when you're 3 years old. It isn't cute when you're 33 years old anymore. When you're 33 years old or 43 or 53, there are mature forms of the grandiose self that Heinz Kohut said include wisdom and humor. If other people enjoy and benefit from our jokes or our creativity or our personalities, or they want our wisdom, they want our ideas, they want our guidance, they want us in consultation, that really in a mature way nourishes this need for a mature person. It was actually one of his innovations that a mature person needs this also. Before Kohut, there was sort of a belief that like by the time you're 12 years old, you should be done with this and you shouldn't need any more, you shouldn't have any more narcissistic needs. Kohut said that's really nonsense. And just look at adults and what they need. And all adults, even healthy adults, are able to get these needs met in a manner that also benefits the world and makes other people feel comfortable. So that's what maturity is. It's not that you don't need these things anymore. It's that you can have the needs met in a way that is like good for the world and everyone else. Then this other part of the self that can mature a little bit later than the grandiose self, the idealized parent imago, what that is supposed to mean is it's the kind of person that I admire and want to be like. And I've internalized that in myself. So ideally, if you have, again, if you grew up in the Banchik house, you get parents that you admire and you want to be like. And this is where we get our values, our ambitions, our goals. There were words, I think I won't get into too much, there were words that Kohut used for the kinds of relationships that foster these parts of the self. Basically what he called mirroring relationships. These are relationships where you feel people's admiration and attention, and they really enjoy you. They enjoy you, they're interested in you. And then the idealizing relationships are what nourish the part of you that pulls yourself forward and wants to improve, wants to accomplish things, has a morality, an internal sense of values. And those are idealizing relationships. He also talked about another thing he called the arc of tension. It's sort of the idea that these two parts are in tension with one another, and their tension pulls you toward maturation. What I want to talk about is how our work with patients changes all of these things, both here, how it changes this for us, and how it changes this for us. The way we see ourselves interacting with other people changes because of our relationships with our patients, and it changes what we value and what we like about ourselves because of our work with our patients. I think it has a profound impact. And the other thing is, I'm going to say that the stimulus for this talk is really at a certain point in talking with supervisees and students and with colleagues, especially with colleagues. Some of my colleagues are really, I think the people who know me better than anyone else outside of my immediate family would be certain colleagues that we really discuss our work together. I'm thinking of one person in particular. And I realized that I think I've changed more as a result of my relationships with my patients than I have because of my treatment. And that's really what the impetus for this talk was. And it's like, how did that happen? And when I say this to people, that's what most people, they say, they're sort of shocked with the idea, but they say, yeah, that's actually true. That's what therapists say. I think my patients over time, I've changed more over the long course of my work with patients than the intensive therapy I did for a certain period of time in my life. So I'm gonna now move back to our work with patients. So there was an admonition from my training. A teacher said to me the following. Teacher said, if you have found yourself thinking about patients when you're not at work, you should do some introspection and talk about this with your therapist. You need to leave your work at home. Don't bring your work home. This was like an admonition from my training. Like if you're thinking about people outside of work, like there's something wrong, you're out of balance. You need to set some boundaries. Something is off. And of course, I would say that this quote is completely wrong. This is just absolutely not true. Some questions for you. How often do those of you who are therapists think about your patients outside of your work? I'll ask the people moderating if anyone texts in to read some of those aloud. How often do you think of patients outside of work hours? You know, or when that patient is not there, those of you who are therapists or analysts?
Often, a lot. Frequently.
So I will say, you know, it's really every single day for me. I don't think there's a day that would go by that I'm not thinking about numerous patients outside of hours.
Mhm.
I would never want to be treated by someone who never thinks of me outside of a session. Like I don't think I would want to be. I don't think it would be possible that that person has a deep understanding of me if that person like never ever thinks of me. And it's not because like I think I'm so wonderful and so captivating. I mean, I think that about anybody. If you think of anyone who you know well and is important to you and you care about, you think about them other times. Do you dream about your patients? Well, anyone, he won't read your name or where you're from, although he's going to write it down and send it to me afterward. How often do you dream about patients? Do people dream about patients? Sometimes.
Mhm. Night before last, I dreamt of one. Mhm.
So I would say that I've dreamed definitely about every psychoanalytic patient I've ever worked with, and about most patients I've worked with in intensive psychotherapy. Now, there is a caveat. Not all therapists are vivid dreamers. Okay, so if you're not a vivid dreamer, you know that this might not really be relevant to you. And some people don't remember their dreams except like while they're in analytic treatment and you're talking about your dreams. And then some people, when that type of treatment is over with, like their dreams just aren't on, they don't remember the dreams anymore. But I think people that are vivid dreamers who remember their dreams do dream about their patients.
Mm.
So I'd like to think about, like, you know, why are our patients so important to us? You know, why is that? So these are my thoughts about it. Our work as therapists largely revolves around our ability to listen and understand what's happening deep inside of someone. We can often sense emotions inside people that they themselves are actually unaware of. By the way, anyone take exception to that, or does that make sense to people? If you chime in if that doesn't make sense to you, that we can sense emotions inside people. Now, that's not only therapists that can do this. I do think therapists are cultivating this skill professionally, and they're also in situations where people are more open. So it happens more often in a therapy situation than other situations, and maybe more deeply. But this is a human capacity. Does this strike anyone as you know, not plausible, or we're all comfortable with this idea? Mark and Janet, read the room for me. What's the temperature in the room?
Nobody is saying they're not comfortable with that idea.
Well,
Okay.
you know, telehealth has cultivated sensory more strongly. And I would say the same thing. You know, this telehealth business, you can see the face up so closely that the emotional life of a patient is very available to us in ways that it wasn't before.
I agree with that, although I'm not sure. It's telehealth has been I think that's another talk. I'm afraid to go down that tangent, but I think that there's a lot that you're saying that would be very interesting to think about. So the word for this is empathy, which was defined by Kohut, same person that came up with that sort of egg-shaped model of the self a few slides ago. And what he means by this, he calls it vicarious introspection. What he means by this is that to do this, to empathize with another person, it requires us, requires us to know ourselves and our emotions and how we react. And then it requires us to imagine being another person and that person's situation, and accurately imagining what our emotions, reactions would be like in that situation. So like I can imagine, I think, being Mark, being responsible for thinking of this talk, putting organizations together, having me on, moderating. I think I can imagine what Mark is thinking and feeling as I do this. I also know Mark, so I don't think he's like, you know, really shy and nervous to do something like this. But I think I know, you know, what he hopes will happen. And I think I can imagine being Mark because I know myself. I can imagine being Mark and doing that. And this ability calls on everything we're made of. This is like central to what we do as therapists. And it calls on all of ourselves to be able to do this. Now, we make it easier for ourselves in therapy by being set up for success, but it really still calls on everything we're doing. And our patients help us cultivate what we most value about ourselves and people, which is the ability to deeply know and understand ourselves and others. Like, that's really what therapists most value about ourselves as people. Like, that's what we most like and want to be like. So our patients are the people that have helped us cultivate that. They become very important to us. Erwin Hoffman, and this is the paper he said this in, he talked about, he said, psychotherapy treatment. So the treatment and often the patient, it's both the career doing the treatment and the patient you're with as a person. They actually do nourish some of the analysts or the therapists' more ideal qualities as a person. It's a very interesting and important paper he wrote. You actually have the opportunity to be sort of your best self when you're with your patients in ways that you can't in other parts of your life. So that's an experience your patients give you. It's a gift from your patients. We really like who we are in our consulting rooms. Now, it's important to say that, you know, this idea of our best selves as therapists, it's contrived, right? It's contrived. Why can we be better in the therapy room than we can in our real lives? It's one of the tragedies that you often have to face is that you're more patient, you're a better listener with your patients than you are with people that, you know, you love and are in your real life. We're protected from our uglier parts due to the professional boundaries. You know, we have ourselves set up so that you don't really have a lot of needs as the therapist from your patient, and you're a lot less vulnerable to the patient. So you are set up to be more tolerant, more patient, no pun intended, more understanding, more compassionate, less hurt, more understanding and accepting of reactivity, less hurt. It's not perfect, you know, but it's actually, you're buffered and you're set up for success more in your office than you are in your real life. So even though it's contrived, but the ability to be our best selves, it adds a dimension to our lives, which we would not have been able to experience without therapy. And that's really why I believe our patients become so important to us. So I want to talk about transference and the real relationship. I'll define what I mean by transference, but in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that there are aspects of the psychotherapy relationship that are contrived because you're a paid professional listening to the person and they make themselves very vulnerable to you. But there are aspects that are very real. And I want to distinguish between those so I can focus on the real aspects of that relationship. So I'm going to start with a patient. The patient is named Kurt, and he's a 35-year-old man. Now, what do you know about Kurt? I just want to clarify, you know his name is not Kurt, and he's not a 35-year-old man, okay? No one worry that like I'm outing Kurt, who's 35 years old. So Kurt is not Kurt, he's not a 35-year-old man. He's been in psychoanalytic treatment with me for over a decade now. At the beginning of treatment, he was miserably depressed, confined to the basement of his mother's house, pursuing zero activities. He was paralyzed by fears about germs. His mother's been terrified by his suffering and his inability to function, and really, it's understandable why. I mean, he was so fragile and sad and hurt. So she really ended up smothering him with a lot of overprotectiveness. But I don't blame her for the overprotectiveness. Like, no compassionate, normal mother could not have been overprotective of Kurt. And by the way, that's something, it's not the topic here, but I just want to say that usually when we think about, like, you know, overprotective parents that are coddling their children, I usually see it as a really difficult kid with a lot of vulnerabilities, and these parents are doing the best they can to help their kids through life. And I usually see it differently than the narrative of the overprotective parent causing problems. It does cause problems to be overprotective, but I think it's inevitable with certain people. They were both abandoned by his father. He spent many years declaring to others and reassuring himself that he didn't need a father. He has no negative feelings about not having a father or the fact his father is absent from his life. Years later, now with a lot of, you know, he comes to treatment multiple times a week for greater than 10 years. He has a professional degree. He's had girlfriends. He's bought his own home. He's making a living as a professional, and he really has a life. He recently said to me, "You've become the person I want to be like. I feel like you showed me how a man can act and feel. I can see a time that I'm not going to need you anymore. I think you'll be happy that I'm ready to be on my own, but I'm also afraid it's going to hurt you when I leave." That's what Kurt said. So I want to think about this statement, and I want to say there's, you know, two aspects of the statement. Yes, it's true that this is also transference. It kind of parallels his enmeshed relationship with his mother, who's so involved and won't let him go. But I think this is also true. He knows that the fact that I'm so important to him, it is very meaningful to me. That's not true. You know, that's also true, and that's real in our relationship. That is not a transference idea. That's real, and he knows this. He knows this about me. What is transference? I'm going to explain what this is. Again, it's for the purpose of clarifying what is not transference with our patients and what really affects us. So, you know, there are characteristic ways that we as human beings relate to others. And by the way, I'm also going to explain how our ways of relating to others changes. That's the other reason I want to explain this. So, how do I imagine you'll feel about me? How do I imagine, I had to meet Janet before we decided to give this talk. How did I imagine she would feel about me? How did I imagine she'd respond to me? How do I feel about myself when I talk about myself or present myself or just sit with myself? This is a permanent part of our personalities. This is really like deep inside of us. Now, it's not that it can't be changed, but it's an enduring part of our personalities. It can be slowly changed over time. We carry this with us everywhere we go. There's specific situations and personality types that trigger different reactions. I mean, that's true. A really harsh person, a really flattering person, a really indifferent person, you know, we react differently, but it's strongly influenced by early childhood experiences. I just want to give us some examples of early childhood experiences. I'm going to ask people to do a thought exercise. Those who are willing to share right now, what is your first memory? Now, I'm not worried about the historical truth. I'm wondering, like, what do you think of as your first memory? You know, what's the first thing you can recall? I'm not worried about whether it's true or not. I doubt it possibly could be, because our memories go back to before we had linear knowledge of things.
Being hugged by my mom, what Stephen says.
If you guys want to direct message Mark or myself, we won't read the name and the others won't see the name if you want to answer it. So you can use the direct message function.
Or we don't need to read the names anyway. So it's
right. But the group sees them.
Sitting in the bay window watching it snow. Personally, I remember being on the subway with my mother, I think 4 years old, sitting on the plastic seat looking at the window, watching the lights go by, and the train kind of rocking back and forth.
My younger brother being born.
Pooping pants in preschool.
Okay.
Finishing a glass of milk and putting it up on the table.
And you know, Nahum, somebody also asked, how is it that your patient knew that you cared about him and thought about him?
So let me keep that in mind and get back to that. Let me keep that in mind and get back to that while we're doing this thought exercise.
My dad putting me on top of the refrigerator, and we laughed. Standing in my crib when it was dark at night, looking at all the magical movements of energy.
Being picked up out of my crib due to wearing leg braces, not being able to stand.
Throwing bottle out of my crib.
So I'm going to give some examples of ways that some people's first memories kind of indicate sort of like a basic sort of sense of themselves in the world. There are children whose senses that his parents were very annoyed and aggravated by them. There's a child whose senses that his parents were very frustrated with him. There's a child with very narcissistic parents who demand that he idealizes and admires them. It's a child whose father abandoned the family and feels that he did so because he was so frustrated with that child's neediness as a little child for love and attention. I think we can imagine if this is sort of like what the early experiences are for someone, a lot of people, this becomes like an enduring aspect of how they experience others. Now, what does this have to do with transference? So transference is a special term that we developed for how this kind of like early orientation toward the world and basic way of feeling about yourself and others. Like these two kids that I presented before, one feels that he's interesting and other people are interested in him, and another feels annoying and people are aggravated with him. So what happens in a special kind of relationship? The special kind of relationship I'm talking about is a relationship with differentials in power, authority, and dependency. Examples would be like a teacher-student relationship, a rabbi-congregant relationship, or other clergy and congregant, an adult-child relationship, a boss-employee relationship, supervisor-supervisee, certainly psychotherapist-patient. The transference, really the transference are those feelings are greatly exaggerated and intensified in relationships where there's a great asymmetry and vulnerability, okay? And that's what these relationships have in common. The student is much more vulnerable than the teacher. The congregant is much more vulnerable than the rabbi or the priest. The child is more vulnerable than the parent or the adult. The employee is more vulnerable than the boss. A supervisee is more vulnerable than the supervisor, and the patient is more vulnerable than the therapist. So this term describes in that relationship where someone's vulnerability is so much greater than the other person, how these feelings get exaggerated. Why do they get exaggerated? It's probably reminiscent of early experiences with parents or other child givers. Is the therapy patient a special case, or is it really similar to all these other ones? I don't know. I think it's a special case, but I work as a therapist, so I also work as a supervisor. I think that my supervisees are very vulnerable to me, actually. I don't know if it's a special case, but it's the case that we theorize about as therapists, so that's why we give it the most attention in our writing, in our literature. So the term transference is formally or technically reserved for this kind of relationship, this real asymmetry and vulnerability. Now, it's also interesting to note that all these relationships are situations where there is potential for great abuse. So when you're in a relationship with someone who you're going to be much more vulnerable to, and they really could hurt you if they were not ethical or were not disciplined, And even if they are acting within their bounds, but they're just off or insensitive or off a certain day, that might really hurt you anyway. Though in those relationships, all of your insecurities, all of your tendencies, they get like really magnified and exaggerated. They come out in like a wild way in those relationships. So to a certain degree, there's an aspect of the patient's relationship with the therapist that really is determined by the transference. Like if I come into Mark and I want Mark's help because I'm really hurting and I'm trusting on Mark to listen to me, like what Mark says to me is going to have like a really heightened importance. Is it going to be understanding and accepting? Is it going to be blaming? And I'm going to hear it as like blaming if I tend to hear everyone as blaming. I'm going to hear it as accepting if I tend to hear things accepting. Like my past is really going to color to a certain degree how this powerful expert that I need his help with is going to make me feel. But and there's lots of psychodynamic theory and therapy technique that really revolves around this whole idea, because we use the transference as like a special window to understand the person's deepest emotional problems, unmet needs, and difficulties in relationships. So like the fact that that happens is like, actually, that's part of how the therapy takes shape. It's how we learn about someone. But there's also a real relationship that takes place with our patients. And that's what I'm thinking about more in this talk than the transference relationship. They actually do notice our real personalities, our humor, our compassion, our sensitivity. Like those are real things that they're really reacting to. They also notice our insensitivity, our callousness, our thoughtlessness, our impatience. The feeling of being profoundly understood and deeply accepted and cared for, it's an authentic, and in many cases, for many people, an unprecedented emotional experience. There are many people that have never felt so deeply accepted and understood as they do in a therapy relationship, because they've never allowed themselves to be that vulnerable. And it took a long, long time in therapy. Now, I want to go back to the person that asked, how did Kurt know this about me? Because he saw for years and years in a row, multiple times a week, how much attention I paid to every little nuance of his feelings, what I remembered, what I can put together, what I can tie together, how much I understand him. And he could just sense my own nonverbal communication, my own passion, my own compassion, my own feelings about him. And we can feel how people feel about us. So he feels all that in a real way. Now, yes, it's colored by his transference. I think it took many years for him to even let himself know that someone could care about him and that he wants someone to care about him. I mean, he was so inhibited from the idea of an accomplished older person or man taking an interest in him. That was terrifying to him. He didn't want to know that he had those needs because it was so hurtful that his father had abandoned him. So, you know, he saw that I became sensitive to that. He saw that I didn't want to shame him or humiliate him. He saw that he got to know me through how I work with him. That's how I think he learned this about me. The therapist's actual personality is a very powerful dimension to this experience. Like that's part of the equation. The patient's actual relationship with the therapist as a real person allows the therapist to experience himself or herself in new ways, better ways, more mature ways, and compassionate ways. It's not the transference relationship that lets you see yourself in a new way. You learn things about yourself when you realize how much baggage you're bringing with you that is not really what your therapist thinks about you or knows about you. You learn about yourself how much you can distort relationships if you see them in the wrong way. That's what you learn by learning about the transference. But the actual real relationship with your therapist is actually how you get to know yourself and experience yourself in a new way. There are two writers, I neglected to mention them here. One is Hans Lowald, in a very important paper he wrote. I'll send these references to Mark and Janet afterward. And another is Frank Summers. They both wrote important papers on therapeutic action, that are classic papers. Hans Lewald's is better known because Frank Summers is still an active analyst and teacher and writer, and he doesn't yet have the legacy that Hans Lewald did, but I think he will. He's a very important thinker, and a wonderful person. I've talked to him on the phone. And so these relationships, it's the real relationship that actually gives the patient a new experience of him or herself. I think this is the greatest privilege of working as a psychotherapist. And these relationships shape the therapist's personalities and alter how they know and feel about themselves.
So Andrew,
Yes.
in order to honor real relationships, I just want to say that Ellen Laborsky writes, my father, Lester Laborsky, developed the CCRT as a way to research the transference.
Yes, he did. Was Ellen here when I tried to do justice to her father's magnificent theory of personality formation?
Yeah, I believe she was.
Okay.
Very sweet. Very sweet.
Yeah,
I hope I did it justice, because I admire him very much and teach it all the time. And it's one of his greatest books on is called Understanding Transference. That's really wonderful for me to hear. So back to the theory a little bit. And again, it's because I want to talk about how this changes us, not how we change our patients. How does this change us? So this is the CCRT approach. This is Dr. Laborsky's, Ellen's dad's approach. And we have, these are the terms in our minds. We have what we call internalized objects. It's a terrible term. That is not Dr. Laborsky's fault, by the way. He did not come up with that terrible term. It's others before him that did. He was stuck with it. They are the people that we carry around inside us and imagine ourselves interacting with. So inside of us at all times, there's the self-representation, the internalized objects, and then the way we interact. And these are our object relations. And they spill over into our real lives where, there's the needs and wishes in real life situations we have with people. But the way we respond, the way we imagine they'll respond to us is how this got carried forward. And then our actual behavior, we act out what is going on inside our minds in this way. Now, another term for this, which is I think Joseph Sandler's term, but it got generalized, is this inner world. This is like the movie playing in your mind 24/7 that you're the star of. And the other objects, the internalized objects, they're the supporting roles inside. That is the representational world. That's your inner life of relationships going on in your mind, whether you're thinking about them or not. They're happening when you're sleeping, when you're driving, when you're talking. They're going on in your mind all the time. And our therapy relationship, the therapist's representational world changes because of our patients. I'm going to give like an example of what I'll call a therapist relational schema. These people are acting mean because they're protecting themselves against pain and embarrassment. That's why, this is how I understand these people that are acting mean. I can establish a relationship with them that allows them to feel safe and be open with me. That's how I feel about people that are difficult and mean. This becomes part of our representational world. And then this is what becomes part of our life. She has insulted me and I want to tell her off. Like I'm annoyed. She insulted me. I want to tell her off. If I do that, I'll trigger her more with just more hurt and embarrassment. That's what's going to happen if I tell her off. I need to figure out what I've done to make her feel insulted or rejected. And my ability to understand this will demonstrate that this is not how I actually feel about her. I think this is actually how therapists start to feel about themselves and other people. And it gets deep down into their embedded views of themselves and others. I'm going to also use the other theory a little bit right now to talk about how it changes. The grandiose self of a therapist is like, we value emotional intelligence, erudition and eloquence, respect of our peers, accolades of supervisors, wisdom, and humor. We like being sought out for treatment and consultation and trainings. We like publications. We like having busy practices. And this is like how therapists nurture that grandiose exhibitionism, I think. This is like the grandiose side of therapists' narcissistic selves. And then when we think about the idealized paranimago, this values and ambitions part, I think the things that we value empathy, the capacity for empathy. We value self-knowledge. We value insight. We value a lack of reactivity. And we value complexity and ambiguity. I believe that these are the things that change for a therapist's narcissism. Now, what happens in life with these changes? So I'll pause for a moment for any questions about we're done with the theory portion. Any questions about that, I'm happy to answer, or comments. But I'm going to move on to like sort of what do I practically see in our lives as therapists now?
Ellen, is this a point where you'd like to make your comment? If so, unmute yourself.
We're so happy to have you.
Yeah. All right. Well, Ellen, feel free later. Just put it in the chat and we will call on you.
Any no comments or questions? Okay, I'll move on. So how do these changes impact our values and beliefs? We help people through our ability to listen, collaborate, and respect the dignity of others. I think that listening, collaboration, and dignity become very, very strong values for therapists. Very strong values. We take very seriously people's legitimate psychological impairments based on or caused by their impaired and dysregulated self-esteem, their distorted views of themselves and others and how they feel about them, their inability to acknowledge their vulnerabilities or take care of their needs, their inability to tolerate anxiety, affect, and distress. These are real things for therapists. Like, we really believe that these are real problems that people have. Most of the world thinks that we're insane, that we take this stuff seriously, because most of the world believes that anyone who's able-bodied should just be able to support themselves. They don't believe that mental health problems are a legitimate cause of disability. We know that they are. This really changes our beliefs and our values in profound ways. One thing I think is that, therapists, with rare exceptions, are more liberal than the rest of the population in most areas of social policy. They are much more liberal. And I'm going to say also that therapists, with rare exceptions, become more liberal over the course of their careers. This is absolutely true. There's research on this. I didn't review the research to cite it, but it's absolutely true. This is a big impact of our work on us. Like, knowing this just changes your view of so many things in social policy. It really does. It changes your views about healthcare. It changes your views about access to healthcare. It changes your views about what you want to spend on education. It changes your views about the need for a safety net. It changes your views about child welfare. Like, it really changes how you look at so many things in the world to see this.
We have a good question. I'm curious if Andrew sees the kind of negative changes that can occur in us as the result of witnessing abuse, or even something that one could think of as evil, or some analytic relationships that are less than successful.
Well, I'm gonna talk about those things explicitly in as we move through, and then that person should circle back if I didn't answer the question. I think I addressed that pretty directly.
And Andrew, one more comment. Someone wrote, I wish I could be my best self to my family members.
Yes, I wish I could too. I can tell you that this was something that I mourned in my development as a therapist. You have needs from your family that you don't have from your patients. So when they don't meet your needs, you're frustrated. And you're a lot more tolerant of your patients because you don't need them to meet your needs. Like, you protect yourself in that role. That's why you can do it. It is a contrived role. Now, there is a real relationship in that contrived role, but the patient that I can be such a wonderful, listening, compassionate person to, if she really were my sister and I were really raised with her,
Sure,
I wouldn't be as compassionate with her as I am when I'm her therapist. And that is sad. It really is sad, and it's something you have to mourn. I can also tell you that it's only because the patient is there getting certain needs met from you that they appreciate this dimension of you, because your family needs different stuff from you. And like, you know, a lot of times they don't want your empathy. They want you to pitch in with housework, or they want you to do the task they've been asking to do, or they need you to just like, they need you to not interpret. They need you to like really take seriously what they're saying. I don't think that our spouses are interested in hearing about how we imagine that their relationships with their fathers are setting them up to be mad at us in this moment right now. I don't think that they find that so helpful. And
you have a dry sense of humor, Andrew. You're great. It's funny.
well, I know it's also funny, but it's like pretty true.
It's true. Somebody
so
asked on the flip side, do we as therapists, like the Officer Krupke problem, do we, you know, in West Side Story, do we tend to excuse bad behavior because we understand its cause?
So that's really interesting question. I think that's I'm going to answer with a patient's answer. I have a few patients that have given such awesome answers to things that I've asked their permission to repeat them without any identifying information. So this is a patient who said, this patient is a therapist, and he said, I just don't think I could ever serve on a jury because I don't think I will ever be able to find someone guilty, because I'm going to see this person as being like led astray by forces and influences that he or she can't control. I'm never going to be able to vote guilty for a verdict. So I just don't think I'll be able to do it. I think that speaks to what you're saying. And I imagine that would be a good disqualification for a jury, but maybe, you know, maybe it's okay to have some people that are therapists that won't be good members of the jury. We've got other people. I don't think that, a lot of therapists I know, I don't think they'd be very good drill sergeants for the U.S. Marine Corps or generals in battle. I think we need other people to be generals in battles, and they're cultivating different skill sets. And I don't want Mark Banchik to be a high-ranking military officer for the U.S. Marine Corps. I don't think that's going to serve our country's national defense needs very well. So I think that, you know, we have differentiated roles, but I do think that this person has a very valid point. I think that we probably can sometimes be too understanding. I do think that therapists can, you know, what's the expression, can call a spade a spade. I do think that there are therapists that also have a sober realism. It's like, you know, I can understand what led you to do this, but you just can't do that. You have responsibilities that you have to, like, you need to do better. So, you know, I it's not hard for me to understand why you did this, but you need to do better. I want to help you do better. I do think that therapists can be, I think part of being empathic is also understanding when someone could have done better. I think that's part of being empathic. And when a person knows better and won't admit that they know better. I think that I think therapists can be too validating and too compassionate, and that's really like a failure of empathy. So I think if it's done properly, it isn't what you're saying, but I do think it's a sort of an occupational hazard. I really think that was a very insightful question. Any more comments at the moment, or I should move on for now?
I think we can move on. It's good.
Most therapists are truth seekers and not believers. I didn't define these terms, but these are kind of two general categories of people who are really, really firmly ensconced in their beliefs, and they're not going to budge. And they have a very clear conception of what they believe. This is what I believe, you know. And then there are people who are like, they really want to know what the truth is, but they don't feel that they've got it. And they're really constantly like, they feel like they're grappling in the darkness for some clarity, and they don't feel they have clarity, and they're changing their views about things all the time. These are kind of two like poles in human tendency for beliefs. And I think most therapists are in the truth seeker category, not the believer category. That's my observation. People might disagree. That's what I think. What are therapists like in relationships? We get along with people who are psychologically minded and insightful. I mean, like, that's who we're drawn to.
Andrew, someone literally just posted in the chat. Sometimes I feel that the people I relate best to are the people I can relate to are those that have had experience in therapy and or as a therapist. So
that person will feel validated by the next two slides. I predict. This is my fortune telling skills. My fortune telling skills. We get along with people who are psychologically minded and insightful. The people we want to spend time with and admire changes as our new identities consolidate as therapists. We value authenticity, balance, some assertiveness and dark humor, irreverence and edge. This is like what we enjoy in people. This is like the kind of thing a therapist would say. He's the nicest person in the world. I just can't stand being around him. I can't stand it. He's so nice, I can't stand being around him. Hostility and anger are important and real. And people that will never acknowledge any darkness or hostility, it feels saccharine. It's annoying. We don't like people like that. It feels so inauthentic. We dislike sanctimoniousness. We really do. I think it's probably the greatest pet peeve of most therapists is sanctimoniousness. We admire creativity, sensitivity, passion, and we therefore gravitate toward people who have these qualities because we enjoy them. This is like who therapists enjoy. We change over the course of our careers, and therefore the kinds of people we choose as friends and partners, it often changes. I'm going to say this a little bit later, but this is a little bit of a preamble. A lot of therapists get divorced. They get divorced in higher numbers than the rest of the population, actually. Actually, the highest rate of divorce is among marital therapists. And civilians, which is our term for people that are not therapists, okay? Civilians think that that shows that therapists don't know what the heck they're talking about. They can't keep a marriage together, but that's really not what it is. Therapists change. You profoundly change from the time when you decide to go into therapy, like while you're in college or something, and you don't know yourself, and you get married to someone for like who knows what reason, and then you go through lots and lots of changes about what you enjoy and what you value. And if you don't have a partner who's psychologically minded, what was really appealing about that partner when you were 18, 19 years old might feel less appealing, and what you care most about your partner may not really care about and like, and it becomes like a growing rift. And a lot of therapists feel this pain in their marriages. It's very common among therapists. We'll talk about this more a little bit later. We value being understood and empathized with. We're very frustrated by people who are not psychologically minded or sensitive. It's very annoying and frustrating. It's hard for civilians to understand us, and it poses challenges in our relationships with them. It really does. There's exceptions, and there are a lot of therapists who are fortunate to be really happily married, and there's a lot of therapists that, even though this is a dimension they're cultivating, they have other dimensions to them, and they don't need their partner to be absolutely everything in the world for them, and they can have certain kinds of things they cultivate with friends and colleagues, other things they can cultivate with their lovers and their spouses. But there's a lot of change, and people who change often, they feel that in their love relationships. Some funny, odd, and difficult things about therapists and relationships. Therapists are really good at apologizing. This is something I've noticed. They're really good at apologizing. Why? Okay. They know what it means to be hurt. They really do. They know what it means to be hurt. They know that they can hurt people. There are some people that like just don't want to believe they could possibly hurt people. They know exactly how they've hurt somebody, because this is what they've learned how to do. And they're good at communicating about feelings, and they can describe emotional entanglements very, very clearly. So if they can get over their narcissistic defensiveness against doing something wrong, they really can be very, very good at apologizing. They really can. Like I said, therapists get divorced a lot. They do. And they remarry therapists. They do. This is a thing. They tend to befriend other therapists. Like this, I appreciate the anticipation of that comment. They're arrogant about and overestimate the value of their empathy. This is one of my pet peeves about therapists. They're really arrogant about how empathic they are. They think empathy can get them through any situations. They really believe that. They're bad at running organizations and businesses, like terrible at it, honestly. Why? They think they have a lot of wisdom that people in other fields would benefit from. They're really bad at learning from other disciplines, even when they sorely need their expertise and guidance. And this includes running an organization. Like running a board meeting for your organization is not about empathy and empathic listening. I've been in board meetings run by analysts, or, committee meetings run by analysts, and they run it like it's an analytic session and make empathic comments to the people. It's maddening. It's ridiculous. You don't get through the agenda. It's crazy making. And therapists are like this. They really are like this. I want to talk about the impact of failure and suicide. I'm going to do this with a case. I'm going to talk about Carrie. She's a 25-year-old woman who I met when she was 17. She actually was a pathological liar. That was actually her presenting complaint. I've actually learned that being a pathological liar is a very bad prognosis for a number of things, for outcomes in mental illness. She had very unstable mood and affect. I watched like tattoos and piercings. She got high in my office. I just watched this like change in her body over the course. She was high. She came to an appointment like really, really stoned high. I actually threw her out and said she's got to come back when she's sober. She started working in therapy. She repaired the relationships with her parents. She moved back home. I felt like her family entrusted her to me. She seemed to be doing better. she loved me, and she told me that she felt like I was her sane father. That was actually a troubling remark because she has a very loving, sane father, but she felt like I was her sane father. She had a sane father. I don't know why she didn't experience him. And her parents loved me. They said that they felt like, this is mistyped. They said they felt like I was a family member. That's how they felt about me. And I want to know, like, what did I miss? It made me wonder, like, what's wrong with me as a person that I did not see that this was happening or coming. We all say that we know that suicide is an inevitable outcome if we see enough sick people. I mean, there's certain conditions. If you see enough people with certain conditions, there's just a certain percentage of them that's the outcome. It's like wanting to be an oncologist and not lose any of your patients to cancer. It's just not realistic. So we all say that we know that, okay? But there's a well-known quote, which is there's two kinds of therapists, those who have lost patients to suicide and those who have not. And I think that's really true. I think that there's a certain amount of sadness, darkness, suffering, and guilt that becomes a part of who you are in general as a therapist, but all the more so when you've lost patients to suicide. Or maybe it doesn't become part of who you are. Maybe it attunes us to a part of who we are, which was, it was already there, but we hadn't been aware of it before. Therapists change their feelings about sexuality, aggression, and arrogance. We see sexuality as like a central, organizing, powerful source of human motivation. We just see how important and powerful it is. It's a very important pillar for one's self-esteem. It's really a part of what makes you feel good about yourself as a person, is your sexuality and your attractiveness, your ability to be enjoyed, for your body to be enjoyed, that you give another person pleasure. That's what it means to be sexy. To be sexy means that you enjoy another person enjoying you. That's what it means to be sexy. We see shame over sexuality as being a real source of pain and suffering for people. We don't believe it's possible to avoid sexual feelings or sexual attraction just because someone's forbidden to you. We just don't believe that's how it works. We do believe this is a different talk. There's a difference between deliberately cultivating sexual excitement and arousal and noticing sexual attraction. Those are very different things. But sexual attraction is just, noticing someone is attractive is just a reality that happens. Deliberately cultivating it is something very different. That's a deliberate act that someone, perpetuates and gets into. That's very different than noticing sexual feelings or attraction. We don't believe it's possible to avoid feelings of anger and hatred, even with people we love. And we know that anger at someone we love is one of the most painful experiences of the human condition. I apologize, this is supposed to be a separate thing. We understand I'm talking about narcissism here. This should be a separate point. We understand everyone's need to feel significant and important. This is talking about arrogance and narcissism, perhaps except our own. I want to give an update about narcissism that has changed over the course of my career. So this June will be 24 years since I graduated my residency training. I graduated in June of 2000. Narcissism has become, in the last, I'd say the last 8 years, largely 7-8 years, but in the last decade has become the new bad word and the undiagnosable condition you're not allowed to say. It used to be borderline. When I was in training, borderline personality was the unspeakable diagnosis who may not be named. That was like the Voldemort of diagnoses. And it's not anymore. It's now narcissistic. That's the new unspeakable term. I think it's due to the insane media coverage of our 45th president and all of our feelings about him. I think that's really what's been the greatest cause of this. It's done a great disservice. I used to see therapists as having a more realistic and compassionate view of narcissism. I think now that therapists that have been in practice for more than a decade, this is true about. I think younger therapists have very distorted views of narcissism and are suffering from the society's distorted views about arrogance and narcissism. That's what I was just saying. Young therapists are unfortunately very unattuned to normal narcissistic needs, and they need a lot of education and training in this area. I want to say a little bit about religion. Not everyone here is a religious person, but I think that this will still be meaningful to you. Our views about religion totally change, and the summary statement is that if we understand, God must understand. Now, what do I mean by that? When the way we look at people changes, the way we imagine God looks at people also changes. It's just unavoidable. Like, we see most moral failure as the result of being unable to tolerate the discomfort or distress of denying gratification of affects, tolerating deprivation, injuries to self-esteem. We think most lies, everyone who never lies, write in a comment that I never lie right now. I want to see how many comments come in. We think most lies are caused by shame and embarrassment. That's why most people lie. We don't think most people lie, or really the inability to tolerate shame and embarrassment is really what causes most lies. Okay. We don't think that most lies are deceptive to like embezzle you out of money or get your credit card number fraudulently. That's not why most people lie. Most people lie out of shame and embarrassment. So we don't like stamp people as liars or dishonest because they've lied to us usually. We think like, okay, you really were ashamed of having me know that. Now, this does have the danger of sort of delving into giving too much of a pass for a real moral failing, but I do think this is how we think of most lying. Our views of sexual orientation, sexual fantasy, masturbation, anger, envy, rebelliousness, arrogance, pride, competitiveness, and people's ugly parts and feelings, it's changed. I mean, we have a different view of this over the course of our careers. We're more accepting, more understanding, less judgmental than we used to be. If we are, then our God has to be more compassionate, more understanding, and that should say less judgmental than he used to be. It's just unavoidable. Like, our view of God is different because our view of people is different. We don't think that we understand people better than God does. There's certain verses in the Old Testament that sound that way, okay? But we reinterpret them, or we turn our hearing aids off for those verses in the Old Testament. We see the need for individualized approaches to spiritual questions and guidance. We're attuned to individual suffering caused by communal pressure and judgment. We're very in tune to that. We really see how much harm and toxicity people can have because of their religious community's judgmentalism or their family's judgmentalism. We admire innovative, courageous religious leaders who are attuned to our clients' needs. And we see the damage done when religious leaders do not take seriously or understand psychological distress, sexual orientation, and gender issues. We see the damage that's done from religion to that. So our religious experience is shaped. It's changed. It just absolutely is. And one of the organizations that I'm very involved in, that's actually the organization through which I met Mark, and I've met, my closest friends in the world. It's an organization for Orthodox Jewish mental health professionals. But, we have a range of views in that organization, but if you look at our organization and the communities we come from, like, our religious views they've shaped and changed because of our careers, from our upbringings or the religious communities that we represent. We're different because of our careers as therapists and our relationships with our patients. So they say the things I love about being a psychotherapist and a psychoanalyst.
There's a question.
Yes.
Question. Do you think there are differences between how psychoanalytic therapists change over time versus how non-psychoanalytic therapists change?
Yes and no. I think that the specifics of what I'm saying about some of what we value, like empathy and deep compassion, it might be like a little more obviously written about and talked about directly in the psychoanalytic and psychodynamic realm. But actually, if you talk to people who are cognitive therapists and behavioral therapists and identify that way and do their work very strictly that way, I think everything I'm saying will apply to them as well. I think that they have changed their views of people. I think that their ability to help their patients has absolutely shaped who they are. They don't have the same like metapsychology to talk about the therapy relationship as the vehicle of change, but they're in these relationships day in, day out for years and years in a row. I think it's basically the same exact thing. There must be some cognitive and behavioral therapists in the room, and you can tell me whether any of this, does or does not resonate with you. But I think it's more like psychoanalytic therapy has this like explicit language to prioritize the exact ingredients of the therapy relationship, and that's not done in the same way in behavioral and cognitive therapy. But I think the same things are happening. I think that, anyone who works with someone for years in a row and helps them really turn their lives around, and they feel a lot of gratitude to the therapist for that, and the therapist can do that with a patient in ways they can't do with people in their lives, it changes you as a person. So I think it's identically the same thing, but it doesn't share the same terminology and theorizing. I'm very curious if someone who would identify as a behavioral or cognitive therapist, or all of you, would chime in and let me know. And I want to know so badly that Janet and Mark can interrupt me. That's how eager I am to know. So what do I love about being a therapist and a psychoanalyst? This is my last slide. This is sort of personal, and I'll get through it quickly, and then we'll have time for discussion and comments. It's meaningful, important work that I am proud of and honored to do. I make an impact in people's lives, and I change the world in positive ways that I can actually directly observe. It's not like, lowering carbon emissions and you hope one day you'll see it. Like, I see it right before my eyes in a very, very direct way. It pays a good wage. I make a nice living. It does not tempt me to break the law or violate rules. It is intellectually edifying. I mean, I get to do a career that is like exciting to read and write and talk and think about and go to conferences and listen to people. I mean, it's exciting intellectual work. By the way, most therapists are actually not intellectuals. Most therapists are socially driven and not intellectuals. There's a subset of us that are intellectuals, but it's intellectually rewarding. It does not take a toll on my body or my health. There's a caveat. I have to make a point to work out because it's very sedentary, but like I'm not like wearing out my knees and my shoulders and my back like nurses do in the hospital, or like people who have to do a lot of heavy physical labor. I can run my own business and avoid having a boss. It's a portable skill. I can move and bring these abilities with me. I don't like move around a lot, but if I needed to, I could. It deepens my understanding of and appreciation for my religious life and studies, literature, film, and art. It really like enhances my abilities to appreciate all those things. It's a lifelong learning curve. Like, I'm a much better therapist now than I was 10 years ago. And I really believe I'll be much better in 10 years than I am from now. I really believe I'm going to get better and better. It provides a community of peers and colleagues I respect and admire, some of whom have really become the closest people in my life. I think I'm really good at it, and it's my calling. I feel really blessed that I got to have this as a career. A caveat to that is there's some therapists that aren't involved in organizations and don't meet with colleagues, and I think that they're lonely. And I think that that's an occupational hazard of being a therapist. I think a lot of therapists struggle during COVID when they stopped meeting. I think you have to go out of your way to cultivate those kinds of relationships. So I think I'll take off my screen share because I'm done, and we'll go to questions and comments, and I will count on Mark, mostly Mark, maybe Janet too, to tell me if this calls for a comment from me or an answer, or whether this is just a comment and to move on. That's how we'll Can Janet and Mark do that for me?
Of course. Let's see. First comment I see is I do have a friend who does CBT. She is engaged and empathetic, and I've always felt that would be primary in her work. When research finds an equivalence between the forms of treatment, it is leaving out that essential commonality. And that's actually from Ellen Laborsky. So Ellen, you might not have been on the screen before when I asked if you wanted to chime in with the stuff you wanted to mention about your father. So if you do, unmute yourself and please speak now. All right.
Ellen does not succumb to pressure.
Or there's tech issues, we never know.
Okay.
Okay, what else have we missed, Mark?
I mean, I feel like people could speak unless that's too much for you guys.
No, that's fine. Raise your virtual.
Ellen, you having trouble unmuting? Can someone help her with that?
I'm asking her to unmute.
It's on the bottom left, Ellen, of your screen.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. Whenever she figures it out, we'll invite her, or someone put her in touch with me afterward.
So Nachum, is there some risk that the gratification of there's gratification in being a therapist that is real and gratification that is transferential or countertransferential. And maybe you can talk about that a little bit. And what is the risk of folks leaning too much into being a therapist at the risk of their own personal lives?
Well, those are two really interesting questions. And I tried to distinguish between what the transference is and what the real relationship is. And I don't feel like over time it's that hard to distinguish between. There are ethical risks of every profession where you are in a position that you can exploit and harm people. And there's no profession where people are in such positions of privilege and power that people are not exploited. So that includes therapy too. I didn't want to do a whole section on boundaries and boundary violations because I think it's going to just interfere with what I want to talk about. Mm-hmm. So one of the risks would be that if a person can't really understand the difference between what they can do because it's treatment and what they can do because of the gifts of their personality. And I think that there might be some people that seek refuge in therapy relationships and not real life relationships, but I don't, by and large, see a lot of that with people. I think that, I mean, any profession, it's a time where people are working way too many hours and life is very expensive and people have a lot of responsibilities. So it's very easy to work long hours. And if you're doing something really exciting with really great people that you care a lot about, it makes it easier to work long hours. So it can make it even easier to work too much and neglect the rest of your life. That's true.
But you can also argue that having an experience that's so gratifying in a real way, solidifies your self-esteem, and you come back to your family or your friends or your parents or whatever things you have to deal with that are more demanding or regressive or even meshed, with a better sensibility about you, more optimistic and more just having more strength. Like even if you were good as a surgeon or good at something else.
So, well, yeah, I mean, I think that everybody's professional skills and achievements become part of their narcissistic needs and their ways that they, their self-esteem gets solidified. So that's true of therapists also. I'm trying to think about how we change over time. So I think that's true of us, that this becomes, a really big part of our self-esteem and what we care about. And I think that in the way you're talking about it isn't all that different than an airline pilot or a surgeon or an attorney or an accountant or a builder who's a master craftsman and builds beautiful homes and has people study under him in the union. And, I think, I have a very dear friend in my synagogue who's the head of a really successful electrical company, and he's a master electrician. And he takes a lot of pride in all the guys that do union work for him that he's mentored, and they've made careers for themselves. It's very similar to being a therapist in that way. So I'm thinking about the things that are unique to us, which are the things that I mentioned.
I also liked, and we'll go to, I like very much the way you validated that we do think about our patients outside of the therapy hours, and that's normative, and that's healthy, and it's normal. We're not talking about a preoccupation, we're talking about thinking. And on the other side, that a patient would want us to be thinking about them outside hours, not in some preoccupation, but in some wholesome way.
I think there are a lot of patients that will be surprised to hear that, because there are a lot of people that are very inhibited about the idea of there being also a real relationship. And that's especially younger patients. I think as people get more mature in their therapy, they realize my therapist is a real person with his or her own foibles and needs. And I'm only one patient, and they have a lot of other patients. But I think that, Dr. Banchik enjoys me. And I think that Dr. Banchik has fun with me when I'm there. And I think that they start to get a sense of the real relationship. I think that people that are shocked that the therapist would think of them outside of the relationship, that's actually when the patient's mostly in the transference and not in the real relationship.
Right.
That's a transference reaction. Yeah. That's so people here that are not therapists, this might sound like weird to them, but this is how I think about it.
We have a comment or question. Interested in your thoughts about the effect of absorbing so much trauma over the lifespan of our
question.
I value my sense of humor in my personal life and in my work, but notice I've become more intense and serious over the years, some of which may be aging, regardless of career. What are your thoughts?
So I feel like I'm bad at this concept. I feel like there are others who are better at answering this than me. I will tell you that I don't find myself getting exhausted by people's trauma. I find this work to be very energizing. It may be because of how frequently I treat my patients. I find working once a week with someone who has a lot of trauma much more difficult and exhausting than seeing someone 2 or 3 times a week. And I find that much, much easier. There are colleagues of mine. One of my closest colleagues is here, and she is a trauma therapist, and she has treated so many patients with extensive sexual abuse and survivors of incest. And so, but I don't think that I'm attuned to my vicarious trauma. So I'm going to decline to answer that, because I just don't feel, for whatever reason, I don't feel as sensitized to that issue as some of my colleagues are.
People in public are always asking me, and I'm sure we all share this, how can you do this all day? Doesn't it just deplete you? It must, but the truth is,
it doesn't deplete
by and large, doesn't deplete you. Can you help us understand what is it about hearing darker, negative, more angsty experiences is not a depleting experience, but an energizing experience for you?
I think, first of all, I think I set myself up to be able to tolerate it well. You know what I mean? I think there's a certain self-selecting that happens in private practice where people that don't like you, and they just don't really stick with you, and you end up working with people that it works well. I think when people are really, really angry at me, I think I find that takes a toll, and I have to work hard to work through that with people. But it's usually an amount that like I can handle. I think that when people are having real emergencies, like real medical psychiatric emergencies and need hospitalization, or they're having medical side effects and they have to go to the hospital and get labs done. And, I think I find that to be like really stressful, but basically, I think that my years and years of training and supervision and treatment, like, I think that I find it reassuring to delve into people's, really difficult emotional parts and work with them. And I don't find myself overwhelmed by it. It's fascinating. There's a lot of surprise. I don't feel shocked all that often. A lot of things, I usually find myself finding things to be much more normal and common than patients imagine about themselves. So I just that's just usually my reaction to it.
And Andrew, I would add to that, like when I've gone through parts of my life that have been particularly stressful, work is a godsend because you can put yourself in someone else's head and someone else's problems and look away from yourself, as opposed to an office, at the water cooler where everyone would know whatever it might be that you were going through.
Judith
Right.
Judith had a question.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I put it in the chat. Thank you so much for this, because I feel like the articulation of what we've all kind of been sensing and feeling is so helpful, putting names to like, oh yeah, this is who we are. And yeah, we suck at administration. But my question is, I'm wondering if you could speak in terms of change and the therapist-patient relationship, the role of unconscious communication, because it's still mind-boggling to me, and I just was curious about your thoughts.
So that's okay. So I'm just going to help some people know what you mean by that. So unconscious communication is the idea that I can communicate something to you without realizing I'm communicating it, and you can receive it without realizing you've received it, and it's real. And it's real, and it has an impact. So there's a man that lived in our city who was a psychologist, who was a very brilliant man. He unfortunately died of pancreatic cancer, and he studied. He hooked people up to all kinds of physical apparatuses, and he put them in the same room, and he showed that like they sync up their heart rate and their breathing and their posture and their muscle tone and like all kinds of fascinating things. So there's a lot of science that proves this is true. So I am the way I think about emotional engagement with people is that it's verbal in adults. It's primarily verbal in adults with lots of nonverbal. It's primarily nonverbal in children with some verbal. But all of us are still children, and we're behaving and interacting in ways that are very, very embodied, under the surface. We don't know. And so, there are just ways that I can sigh or I can pause, and I don't know that I'm doing it, and it affects you, and you don't know that I'm doing it, but it affects you in that way. One of the so people that know a little bit of object relations theories, there's a concept called projective identification, and it's really a form of unconscious communication. It means that my painful feelings that I can't tolerate, I get you to take them on for me. And people do that in different ways. So I believe that I can study exactly how it happens, and I can put it into words, and it becomes conscious communication rather than it being. I think that it's unconscious communication when we're not attuned to it, but I think this is in the category of how projective identification works. I think that we can look at what's going on and we can observe it. We'll never totally know all the communication that's going on, but in human interactions, there's so much that goes on that we're unaware of doing. I mean, our minds are only capable of noticing the tip of the iceberg as what's going on, but what's underneath the iceberg, what's happening in the system, you're reading it, whether you know you're reading it or not, you're scanning me. You know, we often have physiological reactions before the brain notices what we saw and what we did. So I think that happens in all kinds of relationships. And I do think that a very big part of how we engage with all people, including our patients, but this is also our loved ones, our children, our spouses, our friends, our employees, our colleagues, strangers on the street. We're interacting with each other without realizing all the levels of our interaction. So that's how I think of unconscious communication being in this. It's a very big ingredient to how we engage with people. So it's a big component. I do think that in a therapy where you get to see someone multiple times a week and really zero in on these things, more of the communication becomes conscious that used to be unconscious. I think it's discoverable. I don't think it's mystical. I don't think it's metaphysical. I think it's actually rational and observable and measurable, but we won't always be the ones that can measure and observe it. And we won't know it in every scenario. But I think these are real things that happen in space and time with our senses and our bodies.
And it may also apply to that patient. You made a really wonderful point earlier that sometimes patients come to us and the fit is just not right for them. And they organically leave. And maybe that's just the way it's supposed to be.
I think that's true. I think that I'm on the stubborn side, and I believe I should be able to help people. And if they don't want to work with me, like, I don't try to convince them to stay, but I'm reluctant usually to say, like, I don't think I'm the best person for you, unless it's like some very particular expertise that I just don't have that I think they benefit from. I'm usually like an optimist. I also think that when I said it's self-selecting, I believe that. I think that people do stick with the therapists that are helping them. And then when I think the utility is worn off, people will usually stop. You know, that's like how termination will take place. I think that usually is the case.
We have a number of questions. Somebody commented about the experience of trauma over the years. If you believe therapists may have more medical issues as a way of managing the trauma in a way that's been hurtful to them.
Could you repeat that question for me?
I don't feel depleted by clients at all, but I do believe working with trauma over the years does have an energetic toll on the body. I wonder if therapists have more medical issues than others.
I don't know. I do think that there's a difference between trauma that's happening on a societal level that you're part of as a therapist, like people who are doing therapy now with survivors of massacres and warfare who are part of the communities or countries that have suffered these atrocities. I think that they are called on to do something while they're also traumatized. And we do know that people who have trauma themselves have medical problems that are different than the rest of the population. Right. I don't know. It would be very interesting. It's the kind of thing I imagine Bessel van der Kolk might know about, but I don't know if people that work with lots and lots of trauma have that. And I think it depends on how you're working with trauma. Like again, working more intensely with people makes it easier than harder. There's sort of like a misnomer that more intense therapy is more difficult, takes more of an emotional toll. It's actually easier. It's harder to see someone for a complex problem or trauma less often. It's harder to do that work less often. It's much easier to see the person more often. So I think it depends on the modality the person's working in. I think it depends on the context of the trauma. When it's a trauma that's, like, I know a number of therapists that are very devout Catholics, and they're working with a lot of people who suffer trauma at the hands of priests in the Catholic Church. And this is their specialty, and it's paid for by the Catholic Church to try to help people heal. And they talk to me about, the trauma of seeing this dimension of their own faith and religious community. And those of us that work in the Orthodox Jewish community see a lot of trauma in our communities. And that's something that, so I think there's a difference between, to me, whether the therapist is really part of the trauma. But again, I don't think I have as much expertise as others, so I don't want to.
There's a number of questions that actually address this very issue, that if you just experienced 9/11 and then you're treating somebody who is suffering from a consequence of 9/11, there's a resonance that may be very difficult to actually distance from sufficiently to be effective. There's another question here. How is your role as a therapist informed and been informed by your experiences with parenthood?
It's a better question for my wife and children than for me, but you know, it's changed my view of what I want people to be like and what I think makes people happy. So I think it's changed my values. So I think that, you know, my expectations for my kids are different than they would be if I weren't a therapist. I think that I'm attuned to their emotions. I think I like talking about things in a different way with them. I think that we're attuned to each other in a different way. I think we have different taste in movies and TV shows in my house than they do in other houses. I think, how is it informed by parenthood? Well, I guess I don't see the same analogy to treating someone and parenting that a lot of people talk about. I don't think I'm raising another child. It isn't the same thing as parenting. I see like a big difference between parenting and therapy. So I don't, that analogy doesn't really work for me so well. Some people see therapy as like a form of reparenting, or I have a new mother or a new father. I don't see my role that way. I think the biggest impact, I think I understand what it's like to not be able to control your children and what they believe and what they like and what they want. And I don't think, like, you know, you can just say like everyone has to act this way and then your kids will act that way in the house. So I think, like, being a parent, I think I have a much more humble expectations as to what my patients' parents could have done for them, or what my patients how they can handle their kids. Like, I think I see parenting. I think most therapists have been parents, so this is true for most therapists. But I have a very humble view of, like, you know, what parents can really do. I think that those of us that have really good relationships with our kids are really lucky. I mean, like, I think, like, you can mess it up, okay? You can mess up a good relationship if you're a bad parent, but, like, I think that, like, you know, a lot of it is luck, and a lot of it is temperament, and a lot of it is like, so I don't feel like an expert parent. I feel lucky that I think my kids really love me and they enjoy their company with me. That's like a blessing, but I don't feel it's because, like, I'm so good at being a dad. I feel like, you know, I got blessed with really good kids and they have a really good mom and we have a really loving marriage. And, you know, so I feel like I see a lot of people that are wonderful people and they have very difficult relationships with their kids. And I don't think it's because, like, they've got bad kids or they're bad parents. And I think it's just, I think it's really complicated. So I don't feel like an expert father. I don't feel like an expert in life. I feel like an expert in identifying certain emotional problems and helping people with them, but not like how to be married, how to be a lover, how to be a friend, how to be a parent, how to be a child. I don't feel like an expert in life.
You know, I like that openness and that your lack of need for absolute certainty. And I also love what you said earlier about the patient's mother, who was, you know, we'd easily see them as an intrusive, overwhelming mother, but you rather saw the mother as doing the best she could under a difficult circumstance. And maybe that also came from your experience as a parent, identifying that parents do the best they can.
And I think not just the best she could, like, maybe the best anyone could. Like, I think she did a great job with him, actually.
Thank you.
You know, I don't see how anyone could have like not been really overprotective.
That beautiful.
Involved.
So there's a good question coming here. One growth for me is to appreciate being and maintaining uncertainty. How do you understand those who seem so certain?
So I guess I need to hear some context. I think that sometimes certainty is a fear of loss of control. Now, I want to clarify something. I mean, like in the scheme of therapists, I'm like kind of like a pushy, opinionated, confident doctor with diagnoses and things. Like I'm not like a,
surprised.
you know, like I'm not like, so in the scheme of therapists, I'm not like, you know, a wishy-washy guy, but like, I just think that there are certain parts of life when you really understand them, like, you know, that they're complex and uncertain.
Yes.
And like, you just know that they are. So to me, it's like a very rational thing that I've learned. I don't feel like it's like because I have like this wonderful attitude. Like I feel like I've learned the hard way what you can't know, what you can't predict, what you have to wait and see. You know, like I don't feel like I have some personality trait. I think that like I learned it like through going through lots of experiences that are just complex and you can't predict.
What's your view on non-sexual post-treatment friendship between therapists and former patients? And is there a time limit that you put around kind of a latency between when the therapy ends and when you could be a friend?
I think it's probably usually a problem, but these are usually situations that really have to be talked through individually with someone in a consultation. But basically, like, I have patients that I definitely would have been friends with if I met them socially. I definitely would have been.
Of course.
Yeah.
I have patients that if I met them socially, I don't think we'd be friends. I don't even think they'd like me, but they really like me as their doctor or their therapist. And but I didn't meet them socially. I met them professionally. So I just don't really see how you can transition sanely into a relationship where, like, you know, I'm not here to listen empathically to you. It's like, I want to go out for coffee, and if you're late, I'm annoyed and I'm not going to show up. Like, I feel like there's something that you take on when you're treating a patient that, you know, I feel like I'd still be in a role that I'm obligated to be empathic and attuned and understanding. So, you know, like I feel it would be hard for me to make that transition to a different role where like it's mutual, like our needs are being mutually met. Like I feel like how we feel about one another was forged in a special, unique relationship that is not mutual, and where I'm being paid for my time, and where I'm being paid to like put my needs on the side and listen to yours. And also, like, I